The school always looked harmless in the daytime: colorful murals, neatly lined lockers, sunlight washing over the hallways like warm breath. But the first night he stepped into Redwood Community School with his new graveyard shift keys dangling at his hip, everything felt different. Silence wasn't silence here. It felt constructed, like the building was holding its breath, waiting for him to move first. The fluorescent lights flickered in a slow, tired rhythm above him, and every flicker made the shadows crawl an inch longer across the polished floor. He tried to shrug it off. Night work paid more, and he needed the money. Still, the emptiness tugged at him, too wide, too deep, too aware. His footsteps echoed in an odd way, as though there were slightly delayed footsteps following behind him. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see a teacher returning for forgotten papers or a student sneaking around. But every time he checked, the hallway stretched out empty and cold. His first task was simple: sweep and mop the west wing. But even the brooms stacked against the wall seemed to tilt at an unnatural angle, like they were subtly shifting when he wasn't looking. When he walked past the trophy case, he swore he heard a faint metallic tapping from inside. Something light, like fingernails. He paused, crouching to listen, but the tapping stopped immediately. Dead still, the kind of stillness that didn't feel passive, but aware. Watching. He backed away slowly, telling himself it was just the building settling in the cold night air, though he didn't quite believe it. As he continued down the corridor, the lockers began making soft, scattered clicking noises. One here, another 50 feet down, then another behind him, a rhythm that didn't match pipes or old metal expanding. A rhythm that mimicked someone lightly knocking from the inside. He tightened his grip on his mop handle, pulse climbing into his throat. An uneasy pressure settled on his chest as he approached the dimmer part of the wing, where the lights tended to hum louder. The sound wasn't just electrical, it had a faint, breathy undertone, like someone whispering through clenched teeth. He slowed his steps, listening, trying to make out a pattern or a word, but the whisper dissolved every time he focused on it. The further he walked, the heavier the air felt. Memories of daytime laughter and chaos seemed completely erased, replaced by a strange sensation that he wasn't supposed to be here. That he had entered something meant to stay untouched after dark. His nerves prickled like static crawling under his skin. By the time he reached the end of the wing, he felt certain of only one thing: he wasn't alone in the school tonight. Something unseen was moving with him, quietly, patiently, waiting for him to step into the next hallway. He hadn't seen her yet, but he knew she was there. At the far end of the hallway, by the bathroom doors, a small shadow lingered, a child-sized shape so still it could have been a coat on a hook. His heart thudded painfully against his ribcage as he called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" The silence that answered him was hollow, like the sound had passed through a tunnel lined with emptiness. As he stepped closer, the shadow shifted slightly. Just a twitch, enough to make him stumble in fear, gripping his mop like a weapon. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered to himself, though his voice barely carried. The lockers around him seemed to sigh with him, metal doors rattling faintly as if the building itself was warning him back. He paused at the bathroom entrance. The door was locked, odd, because he knew for certain it hadn't been. He rattled the handle gently, his knuckles white. No response, only silence. A cold draft wafted from the cracks under the door, brushing against his neck and making him shiver. Something was inside, he could feel it. A soft sniffle broke the stillness. He froze. The sound came from behind the door, low and pitiful, like someone barely holding back tears. He strained to hear it again, heart hammering, trying to pinpoint the source. Each second stretched longer than the last, and then, as suddenly as it had started, the crying stopped. The hallway fell into suffocating quiet once more. Against his better judgment, he crouched down, pressing his ear to the door. There was a faint thump, like someone lightly tapping their hands against the stall inside. He jerked back, nearly losing his balance. His rational mind screamed for him to leave, but some part of him, a part he didn't understand, wanted to help. He glanced around nervously. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting the hallway into fleeting darkness. For a moment, he thought he saw movement inside the bathroom, shadows flitting across the frosted glass panels. But every time he looked directly, the room seemed empty. Was his mind playing tricks? Or was it something more sinister? The whispering began then, soft, almost imperceptible, like a breath curling along the edges of his ear. "Help me." He whipped around, flashlight swinging, but the hallway remained deserted. His pulse raced. His breath came in quick, shallow bursts. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, even if nothing was visible. Finally, he straightened up, gripping his mop like a lifeline. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, shadows twisting unnaturally in the corners of his vision. He realized, with a sinking dread, that whatever was here wasn't going to leave him alone tonight. It was waiting, and somehow, he had already walked straight into its world. He decided to check the CCTV room before venturing any further, hoping to catch a glimpse of what, or who, might be haunting the halls. The security monitors glowed dimly in the small room, each screen a slice of the empty school. As he scrolled through the feeds, nothing seemed unusual, until he switched to the hallway he had just left. On the screen, his own figure walked past the lockers, mop in hand, just as it had in real life. But behind him, reflected in the glass of the trophy case, a small, dark shape moved. It was unmistakably child-sized, standing perfectly still, staring at him. He leaned closer, heart hammering, but the figure vanished the moment he blinked. He rubbed his eyes and shook his head. "It's just a reflection, a trick of the camera," he told himself. Yet the unease crawling up his spine refused to be dismissed. Every instinct screamed that something unnatural was present, following him, waiting for the moment he let his guard down. The monitors flickered, and for a brief moment, every screen went black. When the images returned, the hallway footage showed something impossible. The same small figure he had glimpsed before was now closer, standing mid-hallway, just past the lockers. It didn't move, didn't blink, but its presence was heavy, oppressive. His breathing grew shallow. He realized the figure mirrored his movements perfectly, step for step, though the hallway behind him remained empty. The shadow was aware of him, mimicking him, and yet completely disconnected from the physical world he occupied. Summoning every ounce of courage, he grabbed the flashlight and ran toward the hallway, determined to confront what he could only describe as a ghostly child. The closer he got, the colder the air became, his breath visible in sharp white puffs. He reached the spot where the figure had stood, but there was nothing. Just empty lockers and the faint echo of footsteps that weren't his own. Then came the whisper. Soft, fragile, almost pleading. "Don't leave me." The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, pressing into his mind. A chill wrapped around his chest, constricting his lungs, demanding attention, demanding he see what was hidden. He stumbled back toward the CCTV room, heart racing, mind spinning. The school was no longer a building, it was alive, aware, and somehow haunted by a presence tied to this place. And as he looked once more at the monitors, he saw it. The figure now stood right behind him, inches away, though when he turned, the hallway remained empty. The school was watching, and he had stepped too far into its shadow. By the time he regained his composure, the hallway seemed almost normal again, empty, silent, as if the night's terror had been a fleeting hallucination. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every reflective surface, trophy cases, windows, polished floors, seemed to hide a pair of tiny, dark eyes, waiting for him to misstep. He returned to the bathroom, compelled by a mixture of fear and obligation. The door was still locked from the inside, stubborn and unyielding. He pressed his ear against it, and this time, the crying returned, not soft, not distant, but sharp and insistent, like a child trapped and panicking. His hands trembled, brushing against the cold metal of the doorknob. Summoning a courage he didn't feel, he tried to force the door open. It didn't budge. The sound of faint scratching began from behind the door, slow at first, then frantic, as if something was clawing at the barrier between them. He stumbled back, his mop sliding across the floor, but couldn't tear his gaze away. The shadow appeared in the glass of the trophy case again, impossibly close now, small fingers pressed to the reflective surface. He froze. Its head tilted slightly, and he could have sworn it was watching him, pleading. The air grew thick, heavy, and icy, and a metallic tang filled his nostrils, like old blood long forgotten. He whispered to it, unsure why he even expected a response. I can't help you if I don't know what's wrong." The hallway responded with silence first, then a soft, chilling giggle, hollow and childlike, echoing as if bouncing from wall to wall. The sound made his stomach knot, fear rooting him in place. Suddenly, the locker nearest the bathroom door rattled violently, metal slamming against metal. His heart leapt into his throat. Something inside the bathroom, something small, something alive in its own unnatural way, was struggling. And the sound wasn't just from the door, it reverberated through the entire wing, shaking the floorboards beneath his feet. He forced himself to step closer, toes dragging, breath shallow. The crying morphed into a whispering chant, repeating a name he didn't recognize. Goosebumps raced across his arms as a cold breeze swirled around him, though no doors or windows were open. The presence was closer now, moving with intention, aware of his every motion. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The hallway went silent, the air cleared, the lights steadied. The bathroom door remained locked, and the shadow no longer appeared in the trophy case. He stood alone, or at least, alone enough to doubt his senses, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Whatever haunted Redwood Community School was patient, and it had noticed him. The next night, he returned with a sense of dread heavier than the night before. Each step into the school felt like stepping deeper into a trap, the hallway stretching longer than it should, shadows curling unnaturally around the corners. The fluorescent lights flickered more violently, buzzing like angry insects, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement in every hallway simultaneously. He tried to focus on his work, sweeping, mopping, checking classrooms, but every task felt impossible. The faint sound of footsteps followed him, matching his pace but never quite behind him. He would stop, and the footsteps stopped, he would move, and they moved again. It wasn't a person, it was something that mirrored him, and it existed outside the rules of reality. As he approached the girls' bathroom, the cold draft returned, sharper this time, seeping through his jacket and numbing his hands. He swore he saw the door slightly ajar, even though he knew it had been locked from the inside. A soft scratching sound emanated from within, quick and desperate, like fingernails trying to break free from some unseen restraint. He hesitated at the doorway, flashlight shaking in his hand. From behind him came a faint whisper, soft but urgent, "Don't go in." It was almost pleading, almost human, but tinged with something hollow and unearthly. His pulse hammered in his ears, and yet he felt compelled, driven by a mixture of fear and the need to understand what was trapped inside. He leaned toward the crack of the door, trying to peer inside, and caught the faintest outline of a small figure crouched against the wall. It didn't move at first, only watched. His stomach dropped. The figure's presence wasn't just there, it breathed, filling the room with a weight that pressed on his chest and stomach. Suddenly, the door slammed shut with a force that made the entire hallway vibrate. The echo of the impact lingered, leaving a ringing in his ears. He jumped back, nearly dropping his flashlight, and saw the lockers tremble as though reacting to some unseen energy. The shadow in the trophy case flickered again, tiny fingers pressing against the glass as if mocking his fear. A soft sobbing started, not just from the bathroom but echoing down the hall, twisting into the walls and floorboards themselves. He realized it wasn't just one child, multiple cries layered over each other, some near, some impossibly far, filling the school with a chorus of anguish. His legs trembled, and he stumbled back, mind screaming to flee. As he backed toward the main entrance, he caught one last glimpse of the shadow through the reflection in the polished floor, a small girl, soaked as if she had been underwater, eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight into him. And though she didn't move, her presence was enough to make him know, without a doubt, that she had been waiting for him. Waiting to be noticed. Waiting for him to see. He couldn't sleep that night. Every time his eyes closed, he saw her, standing at the end of the hallway, small and soaked, her dark eyes unblinking, waiting. Even the daylight felt wrong, too bright, too false. Shadows in his apartment seemed to stretch and twist, like remnants of the school following him home. He told himself it was just stress, a mind playing tricks after too many late nights, but the fear settled deep in his bones. The next evening, he returned, determined to face whatever haunted the school. The building seemed different already, more silent, as if it had been waiting for his arrival. The familiar echo of his own footsteps was joined by another rhythm, soft, hesitant, yet deliberately pacing alongside him. He swallowed hard and tightened his grip on the mop handle, feeling its weight as both a shield and a lifeline. The hallway to the girls' bathroom felt colder than before, the fluorescent lights above flickering erratically. He noticed the air thickening with every step, a pressure that made breathing slightly more difficult. The faint whispers returned, curling around him in fragmented words he could barely make out. Help, trapped, don't leave. Each syllable clawed at his mind, drawing him closer despite the terror clawing at his chest. When he reached the bathroom door, it was no longer just closed, it seemed to pulse, a subtle vibration under his fingertips as he touched the handle. A thin mist escaped from the crack beneath the door, chilling his hands and rising in curling tendrils that clung to his clothes. He felt a presence pressing against the other side, invisible yet insistent, breathing as if the space itself were alive. He crouched, pressing his ear against the door once more. The crying began faintly, then escalated into a desperate, almost panicked wail. Somewhere deep in his mind, he knew this wasn't ordinary grief, it was pain tethered to the very walls of the building, a soul trapped between life and death, unwilling to move on. His hands shook violently as he considered turning away, but something inside him, a stubborn, irrational curiosity, kept him rooted. A shadow flickered across the hallway outside, reflected briefly in the trophy case. He looked, and the figure was closer now, impossibly near, though when he spun fully toward it, the hall remained empty. His pulse raced uncontrollably. The boundary between reality and something else seemed thinner, more fragile. It was no longer just a shadow, He could feel her intent, the weight of her gaze pinning him in place. Suddenly, the sound of tiny footsteps ran across the floor behind him. He spun, flashlight swinging, but saw nothing. Only the echoes, bouncing down the hallway, mingling with the sobbing from the bathroom. The noises were synchronized, deliberate, as if she was testing him, teasing him, challenging him to understand her torment. He stepped back toward the main corridor, heart hammering, mind screaming. But even as he moved, he knew he couldn't leave, not yet. The presence demanded acknowledgement, and deep inside, he understood that whatever haunted the school was bound to him now, tied to his curiosity and fear. And in that chilling awareness, he realized that the night had only begun, and that she would not let him go easily. The following night, he arrived at the school earlier than usual, hoping that daylight fading into evening would give him some sense of control. The hallways stretched out like open wounds, shadows pooling thickly in the corners. Every sound, the creak of a locker hinge, the tap of his shoes on the floor, felt amplified, each one a hammer striking against the fragile calm in his chest. He moved cautiously toward the girls' bathroom, every nerve screaming that he shouldn't go any closer. Yet something deeper, a compulsion he couldn't explain, urged him onward. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a damp, earthy smell that made his stomach churn. He wrapped his jacket tighter around him, but it did little to shield him from the oppressive weight pressing down on his shoulders. A faint light flickered in the bathroom window, though he knew there were no bulbs left on inside. From beneath the door, he could see a shadow moving, small and jerky, as if the figure inside were trapped and struggling to escape some unseen force. He swallowed hard, feeling the hair on the back of his neck stand upright. The sensation wasn't fear alone, it was recognition, as if he had encountered this presence before in dreams he couldn't remember. He crouched again, ear pressed to the cold door. The sobbing started almost immediately, low and trembling, transforming slowly into faint whispers. The words were garbled, yet his mind interpreted them. "I'm here, I can't leave, help me." The intensity of the sound pressed into his skull, making it hard to think. His hands shook violently, gripping the mop handle as if it were the only tether to reality. Then, without warning, the doorknob rattled violently. He stumbled backward, nearly falling over his own feet. The rattling escalated into pounding, sharp and insistent, as if someone, or something, was desperate to push the door open. He froze, panic spiking through him. The hallway seemed to stretch longer, the shadows growing deeper, more alive, like fingers reaching for him. His flashlight flickered, casting long, warped shapes across the walls. And then, reflected in the trophy case glass, he saw her again. The small girl, soaked, eyes wide and hollow, staring directly at him. She didn't move from her place, yet the air around her seemed to ripple, bending space in subtle, impossible ways. She was waiting, watching, aware of him in a way that defied reason. A sudden cold gust swept down the hallway, extinguishing the faint warmth from the fluorescent lights. He felt it wrap around his chest and arms like a vice, chilling him to the bone. The sobbing turned into a shrill, desperate scream that echoed off the walls, bouncing endlessly, disorienting him. It wasn't just sound, it was intent, a raw plea that reverberated through his mind. He stumbled backward toward the main corridor, breath coming in ragged gasps. Even as he tried to leave, he knew that leaving wasn't an escape. The presence in the bathroom had marked him. Whatever had been trapped here, whatever had been waiting for decades, was no longer invisible to him. And deep inside, a terrifying certainty settled. The night had only begun, and the girl's vigil was far from over. By the time he returned the next night, Dread had settled into his bones like a permanent weight. The hallways seemed longer, the shadows darker, as though the building itself had grown aware of his presence. Every step echoed louder than it should, bouncing off the walls and carrying a faint whisper that he could not place. It was subtle, fleeting, but it sent chills crawling up his spine. He moved toward the girl's bathroom with measured caution, flashlights slicing through the darkness. The air felt heavier, damp with a musty chill that seemed to seep into his lungs. He noticed the faintest outline of a small figure reflected in the trophy case again, standing, still, watching. His pulse spiked, every instinct screamed to turn and run, but some invisible tether pulled him closer. As he approached the door, he heard a soft sobbing, low and trembling, like a child trying to hold back panic. His hands shook as he reached for the handle, the metal cold against his fingers. He pressed his ear to the door and the sobbing grew louder, mingling with a whisper he thought he understood. "Please, don't leave me," the words wrapped around his mind, impossible to ignore. The door rattled violently, slamming against its frame in a desperate attempt to open. He stumbled back, heart racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. Shadows on the walls twisted unnaturally, stretching toward him like tendrils. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying a metallic tang that made his stomach churn. Through the flickering light of his flashlight, he saw movement from the corner of his eye. Reflected in the trophy case was the figure again, closer this time, small fingers pressed to the glass, soaking wet hair plastered to her pale face. Her wide, unblinking eyes bore into him, a silent plea and warning all at once. A cold gust swept down the hallway, extinguishing the warmth of the lights. The sobbing turned into a sharp, almost frantic wail that reverberated through the building, shaking the floorboards beneath him. The sound was no longer just behind the door, it felt as though it was coming from all around him, pressing into his mind. He stumbled backward, breath coming in ragged gasps, unable to tear his eyes away from the reflection. The hallway seemed alive, bending and stretching with every heartbeat. The presence in the bathroom was no longer hidden, it was aware, patient, and waiting for him to step into its world. Even as he reached the main corridor, he knew he could not leave, not fully. The girl's gaze lingered in the trophy case, a silent insistence that tethered him to the school. Something had awakened, and she was no longer alone in her vigil. He understood, with a deep, sinking certainty, that the nights ahead would demand more than fear, they would demand his attention, his awareness, and perhaps something more.